By sunset, Saint Agnes House will no longer bear your name, the Duke of Blackmere told his wife. Lady Rosamond will replace you, and tomorrow you will stand trial for trafficking the children entrusted to your care. No one in the orphanage schoolroom moved. 32 children sat behind long wooden tables, their unfinished copybooks open before them. Patrons, servants, and 2 parish officials crowded the walls, all staring at Duchess Eleanor as though kindness itself had just been exposed as a disguise. Eleanor placed one hand on the admission ledger. Its last page listed 5 missing children, 5 unexplained payments, and 5 signatures made to resemble her own. All 5 were written in black ink. For 10 years, Eleanor had signed every Saint Agnes record in blue-black iron gall ink, mixed to her own order. Her husband knew it. He had watched her sign hundreds of appeals at the library desk while he complained that the ink stained her fingers. "Adrian," she said quietly, "look at the signatures." The Duke's jaw tightened. "I have looked at them." "No, you have looked at what Lady Rosamond told you they meant." Rosamond stood beside him wearing a pearl-grey gown and the silver patron's badge that had belonged to Eleanor since Saint Agnes House opened. One graceful hand rested upon the orphanage keys at her waist. "You see," Rosamond murmured, "even now, she turns a criminal inquiry into an attack upon me." Eleanor ignored her. "The payments were entered after the children vanished. Give me 1 day to trace the money. You have already had weeks. I spent those weeks searching for the children while your investigators searched my rooms." A few patrons lowered their eyes. They knew Eleanor had ridden through freezing rain to question coachmen, parish clerks, and innkeepers. They also knew the Duke had forbidden her from speaking publicly after Rosamond claimed such inquiries were frightening away donors. Adrian's gaze flickered toward the black signatures. For one suspended moment, Eleanor believed memory might defeat pride. She remembered him teasing her about her ink-stained fingers during their first year of marriage. She remembered the night he had promised that no child under their roof would ever know the abandonment she had endured. Then Rosamond touched his sleeve. "The Crown's inspector arrives tomorrow," she reminded him. "Delay will look like concealment." Adrian turned to the guards. "Remove the Duchess." Something inside Eleanor became very still. The younger guard approached reluctantly. He had been raised at Saint Agnes and had received his first position through Eleanor's recommendation. "Your Grace," he whispered, "forgive me. You have nothing to apologize for, Matthew. Obey the order." He reached for her arm. The great bell above the abandoned infirmary rang once. Its iron note rolled through the building, deep enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. Several children screamed. Rosamond's hand flew away from the keys. "That bell cannot ring," said Reverend Hale. The rope was cut after the winter storm. Eleanor was already moving. "Stop her," Adrian ordered. She pulled free before Matthew could close his hand and hurried into the central hall. Faces appeared along the upper gallery as children and servants followed. At the far end, a narrow staircase climbed toward the sealed infirmary wing. A small figure stood on its highest landing. The boy was covered in soot. His cheeks had hollowed since Eleanor last saw him, and a man's torn coat hung from his shoulders. He gripped the railing with one hand and held something gold above his head with the other. "Peter," Eleanor spoke his name, as if it might break him. Peter Bell had vanished at Michaelmas 7 weeks earlier. He had been 12 years old, fond of sugared pears, and terrified of dark rooms. Rosamond's investigators claimed Eleanor had accepted £50 to send him to an unidentified family in France. Peter tried to descend. His knee buckled on the 3rd step. Eleanor caught him before he struck the floor. He was frighteningly light. His fingers clung to her sleeve while she examined the bruising around his wrist. "You are safe," she said. "I have you." "No." His voice scraped painfully from his throat. "They know I escaped." Adrian pushed through the gathering crowd. His face had lost all colour. "What is in his hand?" Peter opened his fist. The Duke's gold signet ring lay across his dirty palm. The Blackmere wolf was engraved into the dark red stone, its jaws closed around a crown. Adrian instinctively touched his bare right hand. "I lost that ring 3 months ago." "You said you left it at your London club," Eleanor replied. "That is what I believed." Rosamond recovered first. "The boy stole it. Eleanor must have instructed him to appear today." Peter recoiled so violently that Eleanor wrapped both arms around him. I did not steal it from his grace, he gasped. I took it from the man beneath the infirmary. A murmur passed through the hall. The infirmary has no cellar, Adrian said. It does, Peter whispered. There is a door behind the old medicine cabinet. The ring opens it. Eleanor looked toward Rosamond's waist. Among the old iron keys hung one newly cut piece of brass. Rosamond covered it with her hand. Where are the other children? Eleanor asked. In the tunnel. 4 of them. Peter fought for breath. They chained Robert near the watergate because he saw the carriages. Mary cannot walk anymore. Eleanor felt his body trembling against hers. Show me the entrance. Peter seized her wrist. You cannot go yet. The men are waiting for you. For me? They said Lady Rosamond would bring you before sunset. Then they would put you with us and seal the wall. Adrian turned sharply toward Rosamond. What is he talking about? Tears filled her eyes with astonishing speed. A terrified child is repeating whatever Eleanor taught him. The tunnel is flooding, Peter cried. When the river reaches the 2nd mark, no one can open the outer gate. Eleanor rose, keeping one steadying arm around him. How long? The chapel clock had just struck 3 when I escaped. From the courtyard came the first stroke of 4. Eleanor looked at the ledger still visible through the schoolroom doorway, then at the brass key beneath Rosamond's hand. The forged records had never been designed merely to remove her from Saint Agnes' house. They had been designed to place her inside a sealed tunnel with the 5 children whose disappearance she was accused of arranging. And someone had expected the river to destroy all 6 bodies before the Crown's inspector arrived. Eleanor thrust Peter into Reverend Hale's arms as the 4th stroke faded. Take him to the schoolroom, lock the doors, and allow no one to question him without you present. Adrian stepped between her and the infirmary passage. You are not entering a flooded tunnel, on the word of a delirious child. Then order your guards to go. They do not know the building. I do. Rosamond gave a brittle laugh. Saint Agnes was an abandoned convent when you purchased it. There are no tunnels on the plans. My mother and I slept here before it became an orphanage. Eleanor's voice cut through the gathering whispers. I was 7 years old when she died in the room you now use for storing blankets. The children fell silent. Eleanor had never told them that part. They knew she had once been an orphan, but not that St. Agnes' house had been the place where hunger first taught her to count the minutes between meals. After her mother's death, the old matron had kept Eleanor alive by sending her to deliver medicine, clean chimneys, and carry coal through passages too narrow for adults. Years later, when Eleanor married Adrian, she used the independent portion of her settlement to purchase the ruined building. She had remembered every broken stair and hidden alcove. The original infirmary was built above a drainage channel, she continued. The channel emptied into the river before the western wall was raised. If someone reopened it, there could be a passage beneath us. Then I am coming with you, Adrian said. No. The refusal struck him harder than a raised voice might have done. You have no authority to forbid me entrance to my own property. You gave this property to Lady Rosamond 10 minutes ago. Eleanor faced him without lowering her eyes. You also ordered my arrest. Decide which of those choices you wish to defend, but you will not enter behind me and pretend that makes you my protector. A flush climbed his throat. Matthew stepped forward. I will go with her grace. So will I, said Clara Finch, the orphanage's senior nurse. Clara had arrived at St. Agnes 8 years earlier with a newborn daughter and no reference that would conceal her unmarried state. Eleanor had hired her anyway. Since then, Clara had become the one person who could calm a feverish child without frightening the rest of the ward. Eleanor nodded. Bring blankets, lamp oil, rope, and the short crowbar from the laundry. I forbid anyone to assist her, Rosamond said. Clara did not even look at her. Then you may dismiss me after the children are alive. She hurried away. Rosamond's expression hardened. Your Grace, this is precisely how your wife has controlled this house. Every servant is loyal to her instead of its lawful patron. She earned that loyalty, Matthew said. Adrian turned on him. Remember whom you address. I do, Your Grace. Matthew removed the Blackmere badge from his coat and placed it on the floor. That is why I am ashamed. Eleanor had no time to watch her husband absorb the blow. She approached Rosamond. Give me the brass key. I have never seen it before. Your hand is covering it. Rosamond's fingers closed around the keys. These were delivered to me with the deed of appointment. By whom? The Duke's solicitor. His solicitor has used a silver ring for 20 years. That ring is copper. Rosamond glanced down before she could stop herself. A small mistake, but enough. Eleanor reached for the brass key. Rosamond jerked backward, and the two women struggled for half a second before the key ring broke. Iron keys scattered across the tiles. The brass one struck the floor and split along its middle. Inside its hollow shaft was a tightly rolled strip of paper. Adrian bent to retrieve it, but Eleanor set her shoe over the paper first. "No," she said. His head lifted slowly. "This evidence concerns children you accused me of selling. From this moment forward, nothing leaves my sight without an independent witness." Reverend Hale came to stand beside her. "I will witness it." Adrian looked from the clergyman to Eleanor, then stepped back. She unfolded the strip. It was not a map. It contained 5 columns of figures and a list of initials. Beside Peter's initials appeared the date of his disappearance, a payment of £50, and one word: delivered. The same amount recorded in the admission ledger. Rosamond lifted her chin, proof that the Duchess knew precisely where the boy was sent. "No," Eleanor said. "Proof that whoever forged the ledger copied from this list. How could you possibly know which was written first?" Eleanor held the paper near the window. "Because this was folded before the ink dried, the figures have transferred onto the opposite side. The entry in the ledger has no such mark." Adrian stared at the paper. Eleanor did not allow herself satisfaction. The clue established an order, not an author. Clara returned with the supplies. "The river is rising against the lower wall. We may have less than an hour." "Clara." Eleanor handed the paper to Reverend Hale, who placed it between 2 clean pages of his prayer book. Then she took the crowbar and led Matthew toward the abandoned wing. The medicine cabinet stood against the far wall of a room that smelled of damp plaster. Scratches scored the floor beneath its right corner. Someone had moved it recently. Matthew wedged the crowbar underneath. Together they dragged the cabinet aside, revealing an iron door no higher than Eleanor's shoulder. At its center was a narrow opening, shaped like the Duke's signet. Adrian had followed them despite her refusal. He stopped at the threshold. Peter had told the truth. Eleanor held out her hand. "The ring." Adrian gave it to her without argument. The Blackmere wolf slid perfectly into the lock. When Eleanor turned it, hidden bolts withdrew inside the wall. Cold air rushed through the opening, carrying the roar of water and the faint cry of a child. Matthew lifted his lamp. Fresh words had been painted across the inner door in black. The Duchess brought them here. Beneath the accusation were 6 empty chains. One bore Eleanor's name. Eleanor touched the chain bearing her name. Its iron cuff was large enough to close around her ankle. Unlike the other 5, it showed no rust. "This was placed here recently," she said. Matthew raised the lamp toward the painted accusation. The black letters still shone in places where the damp air had kept them wet. Adrian entered behind them. Rosamond knew nothing of this passage. She possessed its key. A key concealed by someone who may have intended to implicate her. Eleanor turned. "You grant her the doubt you denied your wife." His mouth tightened, but he did not answer. A child screamed somewhere beyond the bend. Eleanor seized the lamp. "Argue with me after they are safe." The passage descended between brick walls, slick with moisture. Water covered their shoes within 20 paces and reached Eleanor's ankles before they reached the first junction. 3 tunnels opened ahead. Matthew lifted his lantern toward each one. "Which way?" Eleanor crouched and dipped 2 fingers into the water. The current pulled faintly toward the left passage, where loose straw and a scrap of cloth had collected against the wall. "The children are not left of us," she said. "That tunnel carries water toward the river." Adrian frowned. "Then we take the right." "No, listen." They stood still. Behind the roar came 3 dull knocks. A pause, then 2 more. Eleanor answered by striking the crowbar against the wall 3 times. A distant voice cried, "Here!" "The center passage," she said. They pushed forward. The water climbed above Eleanor's knees, its cold biting through her stockings. Matthew tied one end of the rope around his waist and gave the other to Adrian. At the next turn, a timber barrier blocked the passage. "Stand back," Matthew said. He struck it with the crowbar. The wood barely shifted. Eleanor moved the lantern closer. The barrier had been built from orphanage bed slats, but one plank carried tiny carved stars along its edge. She recognized them. "Robert made those marks," she said. "This was taken from the boys' dormitory." Adrian's face hardened. Any servant could have removed it. Only someone with authority over the household could remove 6 beds without an inventory report. Lady Rosamond had ordered the dormitory furniture replaced 3 days after assuming temporary supervision of the orphanage investigation. Adrian had approved the expense himself. He looked away first. Eleanor slid the crowbar between 2 slats. The wood swelled in the water. "Strike the lower hinge, not the center." Matthew obeyed. The hinge tore free on the 3rd blow. Water surged through the gap. Eleanor was nearly thrown backward, but Adrian caught her arm. She pulled away as soon as she regained her footing. Beyond the barrier, 14-year-old Robert clung to a stone ledge with one arm around a younger girl. Mary's face rested against his shoulder, her lips nearly colorless. 2 other children crouched behind them. "Your Grace," Robert gasped. "We knew you would come." Eleanor waded toward them. "You did exactly right. Keep Mary's head above the water." She examined the girl quickly. Mary was breathing, but her left ankle bent at an unnatural angle. "Clara will care for her upstairs. Matthew, take the younger 2 first." Robert caught Eleanor's sleeve. "There were 5 of us." Her blood chilled. "Where is Daniel?" "They took him away this morning. A man said they needed 1 child who could write your name properly." Adrian heard him. "Did you see the man?" "No. He wore a black cloth over his face." "What about Lady Rosamond?" Robert hesitated. Eleanor knelt despite the rising water. "You are not required to give anyone the answer they want. Tell us only what you saw." "She came to the cellar once," he whispered. "She stood behind the iron door. I heard her voice." Rosamond's voice echoed unexpectedly from the passage behind them. "This child is injured and confused." She stood at the broken barrier with 2 parish constables and Mr. Vale, the Duke's solicitor. None of them had been present when Eleanor entered the tunnel. Rosamond lifted her skirts above the water. "I came because His Grace placed Saint Agnes under my protection." "You brought constables instead of blankets," Eleanor said, "to prevent you from removing evidence." Mr. Vale stepped forward. "By order of the parish magistrate, all children recovered here must be questioned separately. The Duchess is not to communicate with them." Eleanor rose between him and Robert. "They require a physician. One will examine them after they have given their statements. Mary's ankle is broken, and she may be suffering from exposure. The law must take precedence. The law does not require a child to freeze for your convenience." Rosamond's eyes narrowed. "You are frightening them because you fear what they will say." Mary stirred and began murmuring. Eleanor leaned closer. "Red ribbon," the girl whispered. She tied a red ribbon on the carriage. Rosamond wore a crimson ribbon around her wrist. Adrian saw it. For the first time, suspicion crossed his face without immediately giving way to anger. Rosamond followed his gaze and untied the ribbon with a laugh. "Half the women in England own red ribbon." "Then you will not object to surrendering it," Eleanor said. "To you?" "Certainly not. To Reverend Hale, with a written record of where it was obtained." "Ah." Rosamond's smile disappeared. Matthew returned with Clara and helped carry Mary toward the stairs. As Robert stood, something dropped from inside his wet coat and floated briefly on the surface. It was a small wooden counting token, the kind Eleanor gave every child upon admission. Each bore a number, matching the private register she kept for identifying children too young to know their surnames. This token had been scraped blank. Eleanor caught it before the current carried it away. Robert shook his head. "That is not mine." "Where did you find it?" "In the carriage. There was a sack full of them." Eleanor closed her fingers around the token. Someone was not merely kidnapping the children. They were erasing the numbers that connected each child to Saint Agnes. Rosamond stepped closer. "A worthless piece of wood proves nothing." "Then why are you afraid of it?" "I am afraid of what you will invent around it." The water surged suddenly to Eleanor's thighs. From beyond the far wall came a heavy metallic crash. Robert's face twisted with terror. "The river gate!" Eleanor looked toward the black opening through which Daniel had been taken. "Can that passage reach the road?" "Yes, but there is another room before the gate." "What room?" "The one where they changed our names." Rosamond turned toward the exit. Eleanor caught her wrist. It was only for a moment, but long enough to feel the distinctive square edge of another object hidden beneath Rosamond's glove. A second counting token. Rosamond tore herself free and stared at Eleanor with naked hatred. In that instant, Eleanor understood something equally dangerous. Rosamond had not expected her to enter the tunnel, interpret the current, or recover the children alive. Now that Eleanor Rosamond wrenched her wrist from Eleanor's grasp, you have lost all sense of propriety, and you have something hidden beneath your glove. Before Eleanor could seize it, the river gate gave another violent crash. Water burst through cracks in the far wall and knocked Robert from his feet. Adrian caught the boy. "Everyone out," he shouted. "No," Eleanor said. "Daniel may still be beyond that room. The tunnel is flooding, which means whoever took him may be trapped as well." She lifted the lamp and pushed toward the black opening. Adrian swore under his breath, passed Robert to Matthew, and followed her. Rosamond remained behind with the constables. The passage narrowed until Eleanor's shoulders nearly brushed both walls. Water drove against her legs with growing force. Ahead, a square chamber emerged from the darkness. A wooden table stood at its center. Children's clothes had been piled in one corner, while stacks of blank admission forms covered a shelf above the waterline. Beside them sat a bottle of black ink. Eleanor grabbed the bottle. The same black ink had been used to forge her signatures. Adrian stared at the clothing. "How long has this room been here?" "The room is old. These things are not." A cry sounded above them, not a head above. Eleanor raised the lantern. A narrow ventilation shaft opened in the ceiling, covered by an iron grate. Small fingers gripped its bars. "Daniel, your grace," the boy called. "I cannot open it." Adrian reached upward, but the grate was too high. Eleanor climbed onto the table. It shifted beneath her as water lifted one end from the floor. "Hold it steady." Adrian braced both hands against the wood. Eleanor stood on the edge and pushed the lantern toward the shaft. Daniel's face appeared above the grate. A bruise darkened his temple. "Move away," she told him. She struck the rusted latch with the base of the lantern. It resisted. The table lurched. Adrian caught Eleanor around the waist before she fell. "Again," she said. "You will break your wrist. Then hold me more firmly." She struck the latch a second time. The metal snapped, and the grate swung downward. Daniel tried to crawl through, but a rope tightened around his ankle. "Someone tied me." Eleanor pulled herself into the shaft far enough to reach the knot. It had been drawn so tight that her numb fingers could not loosen it. "Give me your knife," she called. Adrian passed it up. Eleanor cut the rope and lowered Daniel into his arms. The boy clung to the Duke's coat, shaking violently. "There was a man with me," Daniel whispered. He went through the high door. A small wooden hatch stood at the back of the shaft. "Did you see his face?" Adrian asked. "Did you see his face? Did you see his face?" "No, but he made me copy the Duchess's name." Daniel held out his ink-stained fingers. Eleanor's chest tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "He said he would put Mary under the water if I refused." The table shifted again. A wave struck the chamber, knocking the black ink bottle from Eleanor's hand. Adrian caught it against his chest before it vanished beneath the water. For once, he had preserved something instead of dismissing it. "Go," Eleanor ordered. "Take Daniel upstairs. And leave you here?" "I am behind you." A splintering sound came from the shelf. The stacks of blank forms slid toward the water. Eleanor lunged and caught them with one arm. These may identify where the other children were meant to be sent. "Leave them." "No." She thrust the bundle toward Adrian. He tucked it beneath his coat, lifted Daniel, and fought his way back into the passage. Eleanor followed, but the rising current slammed the table against her knee. Pain shot through her leg. She nearly went under. A hand closed around her wrist. Matthew had returned. "I thought you were taking Robert upstairs. Clara has him. I knew you would stay for the evidence." Together, they reached the barrier. Matthew pushed Eleanor through first as another surge filled the chamber behind them. By the time they reached the infirmary stairs, Eleanor could no longer hide her limp. The schoolroom had become a place of calculated disorder. Clara wrapped the rescued children in blankets, while the constables stood between them and the other orphans. Reverend Hale guarded the prayer book containing the paper from the brass key. Lady Rosamond stood at the center of the room, addressing the patrons. "His Grace entered the tunnel despite grave personal danger," she announced. "Through his courage, the missing children have been recovered." Applause began uncertainly. Eleanor stopped in the doorway, soaked to the waist. Adrian entered behind her, carrying Daniel. The applause grew louder. He had only to speak one sentence. He had only to tell them that Eleanor had found the passage, chosen the correct tunnel, broken through the barrier, and climbed into the shaft. Instead, he handed Daniel to Clara and remained silent. Rosamond smiled at him, as though his silence were another gift. Eleanor felt something inside her marriage tear, not loudly, but completely. Duchess Eleanor must still answer for the conditions in which these children were found, Rosamond continued. Indeed, their discovery beneath her own orphanage strengthens the case against her. Robert struggled upright beneath his blanket. She saved us. One constable pushed him back into his chair. Eleanor crossed the room despite the pain in her knee. Touch him again, and every patron here will testify to your conduct. The constable released the boy. Mr. Vale took the bundle of forms from beneath Adrian's coat. These documents must be secured. Open them here, Eleanor said, before witnesses. That is not your decision. They were recovered because I risked my life to preserve them, and because His Grace led the rescue, Rosamond added. Daniel looked from Eleanor to Adrian in confusion. You did not lead us, he told the Duke. She did. The room fell quiet. Rosamond's face tightened, but only briefly. A frightened child cannot understand the actions of adults. Daniel reached into his shirt. The man in the shaft dropped this. He produced a narrow strip of embroidered fabric. A row of silver thorns ran along its edge. Rosamond wore no such fabric. Neither did Eleanor. Adrian took the strip and stared at it. I know this embroidery, he said. So do I, Eleanor replied. It belonged to the ceremonial coat worn by Blackmere's household steward, the man responsible for the estate carriages, the orphanage deliveries, and every servant admitted through its gates. Mr. Jonas Cresswell had served Adrian's family for 24 years. He is at Blackmere Hall, Adrian said. He could not have been here. Then examine the duty register, Eleanor replied. Ask who signed him out today, which carriage he took, and why orphanage bed slats were removed under an order bearing your approval. Rosamond moved toward him. Adrian, surely you do not intend to entertain another theatrical accusation. Eleanor looked directly at her husband. Here was the chance he had refused her before the chance to pause, verify, and follow evidence before condemning someone. Send an independent rider to Blackmere Hall, she said. Do not let Rosamond, your solicitor, or any household servant carry the message. If Cresswell is there, I will submit to questioning without resistance. Adrian studied the silver thorns in his palm. And if he is not, he asked, then you will have proof that the conspiracy entered Saint Agnes through authority only you could grant. For the first time that day, the Duke ordered Rosamond to step away. Then he called for a rider. Had done all three, the plan would change. The rider departed through the eastern gate at 4:30. Until he returned, Adrian ordered every exterior door locked. No servant was permitted to leave Saint Agnes House, and the recovered children were moved into the chapel under Clara's care. Eleanor approved those precautions. Then Adrian ordered 2 guards to stand beside her. I gave you my word that I would submit to questioning if Cresswell was found at Blackmere Hall, she said. You also concealed the existence of a tunnel beneath this property. I was 7 when I last entered it. The passage had been sealed before I purchased Saint Agnes. Yet you remembered it when it became useful. Eleanor stared at him. Would you prefer that I had forgotten and left the children to drown? Adrian's expression shifted, but Rosamond interrupted before he could answer. The question is not whether Eleanor performed one brave act. The question is how 5 children came to be imprisoned beneath a house she controlled. 6 children, Eleanor said. Peter, Robert, Mary, the 2 younger boys, and Daniel. Rosamond blinked. It lasted no more than a heartbeat. You repeatedly said 5, Eleanor continued. The ledger listed 5. How did you know Daniel should be counted before he emerged from the shaft? Rosamond's eyes filled with wounded disbelief. Because the child shouted his name. Not until after Adrian and I entered the chamber. Mr. Vale stepped between them. This interrogation is improper. So, is correcting a number you could not know was wrong? Adrian looked at Rosamond. She pressed a hand against her chest. I heard the other children speaking. Must I remember every frightened word exactly while being accused by a woman who despises me? I did not despise you, Eleanor said. Not until you used children as pieces in whatever game you are playing. Rosamond's tears vanished. For a brief instant, contempt replaced them. Then hoofbeats sounded in the courtyard. The rider stumbled into the schoolroom, breathing hard. Mud covered his boots, and blood marked one sleeve. "Cresswell is gone, Your Grace." Adrian rose. "Gone where?" "No one knows. His room has been emptied." Eleanor felt every eye turn toward her. The rider handed Adrian a leather dispatch case. "We found this beneath Cresswell's bed. It contains correspondence addressed to the Duchess." Adrian broke the clasp. The first letter began with Eleanor's name. Its contents instructed Cresswell to remove selected children from Saint Agnes, alter their admission numbers, and send them through the river passage. At the bottom appeared Eleanor's signature. "Black ink. That is not mine," she said. Mr. Vale examined it. "It resembles the signatures in the ledger, because the same person forged both." Adrian unfolded another page. "This one promises Cresswell £200. From which account?" "The Duchess's private charity fund," Rosamond answered. Eleanor looked at her sharply. "You have not seen the letter." Rosamond went still. Adrian lowered the page. "You knew the account named in it," Eleanor said, "just as you knew there were 6 children." "The charity fund is the obvious source," Rosamond replied. "Everyone knows you control it." "No, the fund is held by trustees. I can recommend payments, but I cannot withdraw a single pound without 2 countersignatures." Reverend Hale stepped forward. "That is true. I am one of the trustees." Adrian looked at the letter again. "Where is the withdrawal receipt?" Eleanor asked. Mr. Vale searched the case and produced a folded document. It bore 3 signatures, Eleanor's, Reverend Hale's, and that of Sir William Ashcombe, an elderly patron who had died 4 months earlier. The clergyman recoiled. "I never signed this." Eleanor pointed to the date. "Nor could Sir William. This payment was supposedly approved 3 weeks after his burial." No one spoke. The evidence against her had collapsed in plain sight. Adrian could have ordered Rosamond's rooms searched. He could have secured the solicitor's papers, questioned the household staff separately, or sent riders to every road Cresswell might use. Instead, he looked toward the patrons gathering near the chapel doors. Tomorrow's royal inquiry would examine not only the orphanage, but his fitness to oversee several crown charities. If he admitted that forged orders had moved freely through his household, his political future would be ruined. Rosamond understood his fear. "If these papers leave St. Agnes tonight," she said softly, "London will hear that Blackmere could not control his own wife, his steward, or his servants. His enemies will call it corruption within the entire ducal household." Eleanor watched her husband make his choice. "Adrian," she said, "do not protect your name by placing mine beneath it." His eyes met hers. "I must protect the dukedom, then protect it with the truth. The truth is not yet established, but you intend to punish me as if it were." Mr. Vale placed a prepared document on the table. "Your Grace may temporarily transfer full authority over St. Agnes House, its residents, accounts, correspondence, and records to Lady Rosamond pending tomorrow's inquiry. The Duchess can then be held separately to prevent interference." Reverend Hale objected. "That would place the witnesses and evidence under the control of a principal suspect." "Lady Rosamond has not been formally accused." "I accuse her now," Eleanor said. Adrian picked up the pen. Eleanor stepped closer. "If you sign that order, Rosamond will control the children's food, their rooms, the carriages, the ledgers, and every person allowed to speak with them. She will act under the solicitor's supervision." The solicitor brought constables into a flooding tunnel before anyone upstairs could have told him what we found. Mr. Vale's face tightened. Adrian heard the warning. Eleanor saw it in the tremor of his hand. He signed anyway. The scratch of the pen was softer than the river beneath the floor, yet it ended their marriage more completely than any public declaration could have done. "Duchess Eleanor is to be confined in the old guest chamber until the royal inspector arrives," Adrian ordered. "No one may communicate with her." Unquote. Matthew refused to move. A second guard seized Eleanor's arm. "Do not resist," Adrian said. "I am not resisting you." Eleanor removed her wedding ring and placed it beside his signed order. "I am ceasing to mistake your fear for honor." His face went white. The guards escorted her upstairs. From the gallery, Eleanor saw Rosamond take the orphanage keys, the forged correspondence, the recovered forms, and the bottle of black ink. Mr. Vale closed the chapel doors behind the rescued children. Everything Rosamond needed had just been placed under her control. Inside the guest chamber, Eleanor crossed immediately to the window. Its iron latch had been replaced, and the courtyard lay 2 floors below. She was testing the fireplace panel when a faint tapping came from the wall. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. The children's signal. Eleanor pressed her ear to the plaster. Peter's voice came through a hidden speaking pipe. "Your Grace, they are putting us into carriages." "Where are they taking you?" "I heard Lady Rosamond say the records must burn before midnight." A bell began ringing in the courtyard. Through the window, Eleanor saw smoke rising from the orphanage archive. Rosamond was not waiting for the royal inquiry. She was destroying Saint Agnes House while the Duke's signature made every order lawful. Smoke thickened beyond the window. Eleanor gripped the speaking pipe. "Peter, listen carefully. How many carriages?" 3. "Are all the children outside?" "No. The little ones are still in the east dormitory." The archive occupied the floor directly beneath them. Rosamond had set the fire where it would climb towards sleeping children, while forcing everyone in the courtyard to watch the evidence burn. "Find Clara," Eleanor said. "Tell her to wet blankets and move the youngest children into the chapel garden. Do not use the main staircase." "What about you?" "I know another way down." Eleanor pulled the washstand from the wall and struck its ceramic basin against the hearth. The bowl shattered. She wrapped the longest piece in a curtain and hammered it against the fireplace panel. On the 3rd blow, the warped wood split. Behind it was the narrow service opening through which coal had once been delivered to every upper room. Eleanor had crawled through those shafts as a hungry child. She had ordered most of them sealed when St. Agnes was rebuilt. This one had been overlooked. She removed her wet outer skirt, tied it around her injured knee, and squeezed into the darkness. Below, Adrian's voice thundered through the hall. "Open the archive doors." Mr. Vale answered him. "Your Grace, the transfer order places all records under Lady Rosamond's authority. Breaking the seal before the royal inspector arrives could be described as interference." "Ah, the room is burning. Then we must preserve the appearance that no one tampered with it." Eleanor almost laughed. Adrian had transferred his authority to protect the dukedom. Now his own solicitor was using that document to keep him from saving it. She lowered herself through the shaft until her shoes found the edge of a ventilation grate. Heat pressed against her face. Through the slats, she saw flames spreading across the archive shelves. The fire did not burn evenly. 3 cabinets stood untouched while the adoption registers, trustee accounts, and children's identity records blazed along the western wall. Oil had been poured only where the documents most dangerous to Rosamond were stored. A masked figure crouched near the last cabinet, feeding papers into the flames. Eleanor kicked the grate outward. It struck the figure's shoulder. He staggered, and Eleanor dropped behind him. The man swung a burning length of wood at her. She ducked, seized the iron poker beside the hearth, and struck his wrist. His weapon fell. He lunged again. Eleanor drove the poker between his legs and pulled. He crashed face first into the floor, but before she could remove his mask, burning plaster collapsed between them. He fled through a side door. Eleanor followed, then stopped. A child was crying inside the smoke-filled passage. Justice could wait. The child could not. She turned toward the sound. A little girl crouched beneath a table, clutching a rag doll. Eleanor wrapped the child in her discarded curtain and carried her toward the archive entrance. Adrian was on the other side, striking the locked door with his shoulder. "Stand back!" Eleanor shouted. She lifted the inner bar. The door burst open, and Adrian caught both her and the child as smoke rolled into the hall. "How did you get inside?" The man who set the fire escaped through the servants' passage. Adrian gave the child to Matthew. "Seal every gate." "You no longer command the gates," Eleanor said. As if summoned by her words, wheels rattled across the courtyard. They ran outside. 3 carriages were passing through the open western gate. Children's hands beat against the covered windows. "Stop them!" Adrian shouted. The gatekeeper did not move. "Lady Rosamond's written order authorizes their removal," he said. "Mr. Vale confirmed it carried your Grace's authority." Adrian seized the man's coat. "My wife told me what that order would allow." "Yes, your Grace." The answer struck with the force of an accusation. Adrian released him. Eleanor turned to Matthew. "How many saddle horses remain?" 2. "You and Clara take them." Adrian stared at her. "You are sending a nurse after 3 carriages." "No. Clara knows the children's signals. She will mark the route and keep them from panicking. Matthew will not attempt a rescue until we know where they are being taken." "We?" Eleanor faced him. You confined me. You transferred the orphanage to Rosamond. You allowed her to remove its residents legally. Do not confuse my decision to save these children with an agreement to save you from the consequences. Clara mounted without waiting for permission. Matthew followed her through the gate. A window shattered above the archive. Eleanor looked up. The flames had reached the old roof beams. If the fire crosses the central gallery, the entire house will be lost, Adrian said. No. Saint Agnes was rebuilt with 2 fire doors separating the wings. Then close them. I ordered them inspected every month. Lady Rosamond dismissed the maintenance men last week. Rosamond appeared beneath the courtyard arch, her face pale but composed. The Duchess is attempting to blame me for an accident she arranged. You ordered the children into those carriages, Adrian said. For their protection. Where are they going? To several safe residences. Name them. Rosamond hesitated. The list is inside the archive. Eleanor looked at the 3 cabinets the flames had avoided. No, she said. The list is still inside the archive. She ran back toward the smoke. Adrian caught her. You cannot return. The fire was arranged to destroy the children's original identities while preserving the documents that establish new ones. Those cabinets contain the destination list. I will retrieve it. You do not know the filing system. I know enough to carry out a cabinet. And if you die, Rosamond becomes a grieving innocent, while I remain the criminal wife who destroyed your house. His grip loosened. Eleanor entered alone. The heat had become unbearable. She wrapped wet cloth around her mouth and crawled beneath the smoke toward the nearest untouched cabinet. Its lock had already been opened. Inside lay dozens of completed apprenticeship contracts, each assigned a Saint Agnes child to an employer in a distant county. The youngest child named was 6 years old. Every contract carried Adrian's ducal seal. He had never seen them. Eleanor gathered as many as she could into her arms. Behind the contracts, she found a printed notice announcing that Saint Agnes House was insolvent and its residents had been legally dispersed because of Duchess Eleanor's theft. The notice was dated tomorrow. Rosamond had prepared the official explanation before the children disappeared. A beam crashed across the doorway. Eleanor was trapped. Through the flames, she saw Adrian trying to reach her, but the burning timber forced him back. The roof groaned above them. Then Eleanor noticed the empty water barrels beside the western wall. Saint Agnes kept 6 barrels filled in every wing. She had inspected them herself each Monday until Rosamond took control. All 6 had been deliberately drained. The fire was never meant merely to destroy the records. It was meant to consume the entire orphanage, erase the tunnel, kill Eleanor, and leave Adrian's seal as the legal authority behind the children's disappearance. A clock struck 5. The royal inspector would arrive at 9 the following morning, but the contract stated that the children must be delivered to their new masters before midnight. Eleanor had 7 hours to escape the fire, recover 32 children, and prove that the Duke's Selena shoved the contracts inside the front of her bodice and dropped to her knees. The coal shaft was no longer reachable. Flames covered the fireplace wall, and the fallen beam blocked the main door. Above her, the ceiling cracked. Eleanor! Adrian's voice came from the courtyard. She crawled toward the nearest window and struck its latch with the poker. The metal bent, but did not break. Smoke blurred her vision. Then a stone smashed through the glass from outside. Adrian stood below with 3 stable hands, holding a horse blanket between them. Jump! The archive occupied the first floor, but the drop was high enough to break a leg. Eleanor climbed onto the sill as flames caught the back of her dress. She jumped. The blanket sagged beneath her weight. Hands caught her before she struck the ground, and Adrian smothered the flames with his coat. For a moment, Eleanor could hear nothing except their breathing. His hands moved over her shoulders, searching for burns. Do not touch me. He stepped back. Eleanor drew the contracts from her bodice. The edges were scorched, but the names and seals remained legible. Reverend Hale opened his prayer book. Place them here. We will record each page before anyone moves it. Rosamond appeared behind the gathering patrons. Those papers came from a burning room. She could have carried them inside herself. That accusation will be included in the record, Eleanor said, along with the fact that you knew there were 6 missing children before Daniel was found. Rosamond's gaze went to the witnesses. Too many had heard. She could no longer erase the contradiction without erasing an entire room of people. The central roof collapsed moments later. Sparks rose over Saint Agnes House as children and servants retreated through the chapel garden. Eleanor watched the dormitory windows vanish behind smoke. She did not weep. Not yet. "Where will the remaining children sleep?" Clara asked, when she returned on an exhausted horse. "The Dower House," Eleanor replied. Adrian looked at her. "That property has been closed for years. It belongs to the trust established in my mother's name. It is the one residence you cannot transfer, mortgage, or give to Rosamond." The words surprised him. He had assumed every roof over Eleanor's head depended upon Blackmere. Eleanor had once assumed the same. "The house needs repairs," Clara warned. "It has walls, water, and 12 rooms. Tonight, that is enough." She organized the evacuation herself. Parish wagons carried the youngest children, while local women brought bread, blankets, and lamps. Reverend Hale placed the recovered contracts in a locked strongbox and sealed it with wax before 4 witnesses. Adrian offered his carriage. Eleanor refused it. "Your crest has already carried too many children away today." By 7 o'clock, the Dower House kitchen glowed with firelight. The rescued children slept together in the largest rooms, guarded by villagers rather than Blackmere servants. Eleanor sat at a scrubbed table with Clara, Reverend Hale, Peter, and Robert. Between them lay the blank counting token, the silver thorn embroidery, the paper hidden inside the brass key, and copies of the apprenticeship contracts. Peter pointed to 3 initials on the paper. "Those men guarded the tunnel." "Did you hear their names?" Eleanor asked. "Only one. Mr. Cresswell called him Briggs." Clara leaned closer. "A man named Silas Briggs delivered new mattresses to Saint Agnes last month. Lady Rosamond dismissed our usual supplier and hired him." Robert touched the blank token. "He scraped our numbers away." Eleanor arranged the objects in a line. The replaced beds had provided wood for the tunnel barrier. The mattress delivery had given Briggs access to the dormitories. The erased tokens severed the children's identities. Adrian's seal made the false contracts appear lawful. Each step had entered St. Agnes through an order approved after Rosamond displaced Eleanor. A knock sounded at the kitchen door. Adrian entered alone. No title was announced. No servant removed his coat. Ash streaked his face, and the skin across one hand had blistered. "The western wing is gone," he said. "The chapel and schoolroom may survive." Eleanor continued copying the children's names. "I found your inspection books," he added. "For 9 years, you paid for roof repairs, winter coal, medicine, and teachers from your personal allowance whenever the charity fund fell short. I did not do it for your gratitude." "I know." "No, you know now." The distinction silenced him. Adrian placed a folded paper on the table. "Cresswell used my seal on at least 14 contracts. I signed a general authorization allowing Rosamond to arrange new placements while the orphanage was investigated. Reverend Hale stared at him. "You authorized the dispersal of children without reviewing the individual homes. I believed they would remain with approved families." "You believed what was convenient," Eleanor said. Adrian accepted the blow. "I have sent men after the carriages." "Recall them." His head lifted. "Why?" "Because Rosamond knows the Blackmere routes. She will anticipate your riders and move the children." "Then what do you propose?" "Matthew and Clara mark the road with white cloth. We follow quietly, without your uniforms or crest. I am coming, only under my conditions." Adrian stood motionless. "You will give Reverend Hale a written statement admitting that you signed the transfer order and the placement authorization without examining the children's records. You will surrender your remaining seal until the royal inspector arrives. You will obey my instructions during the rescue, even when they cost you. And afterward?" "There is no afterward promise to you." Pain crossed his face, but he removed the chain from his neck. A smaller ducal seal hung beneath his shirt. He placed it on the table. Then he wrote the statement. Eleanor did not forgive him. She merely accepted the first useful truth he had offered. Peter examined the contracts, while Reverend Hale sealed Adrian's confession. "This mark was on the carriage wall," the boy said. He pointed to a printed emblem beside the name of an employer, a crown above 3 waves. Clara recognized it. "The old customs warehouse at Belhaven uses that sign." Belhaven stood 8 miles downriver. At high tide, ships could leave its private quay without passing the main harbour. "The children are not being sent to apprenticeships," Eleanor said. They are being taken out of England. A stone shattered the kitchen window. The lamp went out. A masked arm reached through the broken glass, seized the strongbox containing the original contracts, and dragged it outside. Adrian ran for the door. Eleanor followed him into the yard. A rider was already disappearing between the trees, with the strongbox strapped behind his saddle. From the road came the thunder of several more horses. Rosamond had found Eleanor's refuge, and she had brought constables, carrying a warrant for the Duchess's arrest. Eel had turned abduction into law. The constables surrounded the dower house before Eleanor could reach the gate. Their captain dismounted and unfolded a warrant. Duchess Eleanor Blackmere, you are charged with abducting children under Crown protection, destroying charitable records, and coercing witnesses against Lady Rosamond Vane. Behind him, Rosamond descended from a closed carriage. She had exchanged her pearl-grey gown for black mourning silk. Soot had been carefully brushed across one sleeve, as though she had escaped the orphanage fire rather than watched it burn. You have taken everything from those children, she said. Must you now endanger the villagers, sheltering them? Eleanor looked toward the rider who had stolen the strongbox. He was gone. Rosamond had timed both attacks together, steal the evidence first, then arrive with lawful authority before Eleanor could pursue it. Who issued the warrant? Eleanor asked. Magistrate Pemberton, the captain replied, upon whose testimony Lady Rosamond's, Mr. Vale's, and His Grace's signed transfer order. Adrian stepped forward. My order transferred administration. It did not accuse my wife of abduction. It gave Lady Rosamond custody of every child from Saint Agnes, the captain said. The children inside this house were removed from that custody without permission. Adrian's own signature had transformed their rescue into a crime. Rosamond held out her hand. Return the children, Eleanor. If you cooperate, I will ask the magistrate to consider your distress. Clara moved into the doorway. Villagers gathered behind her with fireplace pokers, farm tools, and kitchen knives. Eleanor raised one hand. No violence. That is what she wants. Rosamond's gaze shifted toward the upper windows. Search the house. The constables entered. Children began crying as they were brought into the yard. Peter and Robert tried to speak, but Mr. Vale ordered them separated before they could coordinate their stories. Reverend Hale produced Adrian's sealed confession. This statement must be delivered to the royal inspector. The solicitor broke the wax, scanned the page, and smiled. It confirms that His Grace's authorization was obtained through the Duchess's influence. I wrote every word freely, Adrian said, after spending an hour alone with your accused wife. Rosamond approached him. Adrian, no one blames you. Eleanor has exploited your concern for the children and your grief over the fire. My grief? She destroyed the orphanage you funded. Eleanor purchased Saint Agnes with her settlement. She allowed you to believe otherwise because it served her. Adrian looked toward the patrons who had followed the constables from the village. They were waiting to see whether he would protect his standing again. This time, he walked to the center of the yard. My wife did not deceive me, he said. I deceived myself. Rosamond's expression changed. Adrian continued before she could interrupt. I signed the order transferring Saint Agnes to Lady Rosamond, despite being shown evidence that the orphanage records were forged. I authorized child placements without examining them. When Duchess Eleanor recovered the missing children and exposed further contradictions, I confined her and placed the witnesses under the control of the woman she had accused. The captain lowered the warrant slightly. Mr. Vale whispered, Your Grace, consider what you are admitting. I am admitting negligence that may cost me every crown appointment I hold. I am admitting that my vanity and political fear endangered children, and I am stating publicly that Eleanor warned me of the precise consequences before I signed. Silence spread across the yard. The confession did not release Eleanor. It could not restore the stolen evidence or revoke a magistrate's warrant, but it destroyed Rosamond's claim that the Duke supported her account. You are unwell, Rosamond said. No, I was a coward. There is a difference. The words cost him. Eleanor saw that. They did not purchase forgiveness. The captain hesitated, but Mr. Vale pointed toward the children. Whatever His Grace now claims, the placement contracts remain valid. Lady Rosamond possesses copies bearing his seal. The solicitor opened his dispatch case. Inside were 32 contracts. Each child had been assigned to an employer at Belhaven, with departure authorized before midnight. The originals Eleanor rescued were gone. The black ink bottle had disappeared during the fire. The rider had stolen the strongbox, and the children were now legally in Rosamond's custody. Rosamond had anticipated every accusation. "Load them into the carriages," she ordered. Eleanor's hands curled at her sides. Then Peter slipped free of a constable and ran to her. "They changed the emblem," he whispered. "What?" The mark on the carriage was not exactly like the one on the contract. The waves went the other way. Eleanor remembered the crown above 3 waves. She had assumed it represented the Belhaven Customs Warehouse because Clara recognized it. But if the waves had been reversed, it was not an official emblem. It was a printer's block pressed from the wrong side. A copied image. Eleanor seized one of Rosamond's contracts before Mr. Vale could close the case. The letters were sharp, but the emblem's waves curled toward the east. The paper hidden inside the brass key carried faint transferred writing because it had been folded while wet. The same principle applied here. Someone had copied an authentic warehouse seal by pressing damp paper against it. When that impression was used to create the false contracts, the design reversed. Rosamond's documents could not have come from Belhaven's official office, but explaining that in a dark yard would not defeat 32 contracts supported by a ducal seal. Eleanor needed the original emblem, the printer who made the copies, and a lie Rosamond could not withdraw. She looked at the carriages. "Very well," Eleanor said. "Let the children go to Belhaven." Clara stared at her in horror. Rosamond smiled slowly. "At last, some sense. But I will accompany them," Eleanor added. "The contracts name me as the former patron who verified their identities. Belhaven cannot legally receive them without my confirmation. Mr. Vale began to object. Eleanor held up the contract. "Unless you admit these documents were never intended to survive scrutiny at the warehouse." Rosamond exchanged a glance with him. There it was the fear Eleanor needed. "You may accompany them in custody," Rosamond said. "The royal inspector can question you after the children have been transferred." Eleanor allowed the captain to place the warrant chain around her wrists. Adrian moved toward her, but she shook her head. "Remain here. Find the stolen strongbox and bring every witness to Belhaven before midnight. You are walking into their trap." "No," Eleanor said, watching Rosamond signal the drivers. "I am giving her the only thing. Arrogance cannot resist the chance to prove her own lie in public." The carriage door closed. As the convoy rolled toward Belhaven, Eleanor saw the river beyond the trees, glittering beneath the moon. The convoy reached Belhaven at 11:20. Fog drifted between the warehouses, hiding the upper masts of the nameless ship. Its gangplank had already been lowered, and sailors waited beside the quay with lanterns hooded in black cloth. No customs officers came to receive the carriages. Eleanor stepped down with her wrists chained. "This is not a lawful transfer," she said. Rosamond followed her onto the cobblestones. "The officials are waiting inside." "Then why is the ship prepared to leave before they inspect the children?" "The tide does not obey your suspicions." Neither, Eleanor thought, did greed. She looked at Peter through the barred carriage window and tapped 3 times against the door. "Wait." Before leaving the dower house, she had whispered one instruction to Clara. "Keep the rescued children together and make them refuse to answer to any unfamiliar name. If the guards attempted to separate them, they were to use the tunnel signal until every child joined in." Now Peter answered with 3 knocks. The signal passed from carriage to carriage. Rosamond glanced toward the drivers. "Unload them." The children did not move. Constables opened the first door and called 3 unfamiliar names. No one responded. "They are the names written on your contracts," Eleanor said. "Yet none belongs to a child inside." Mr. Vale stepped closer. "The receiving employers assigned new names for administrative convenience. Before meeting them, it is not unusual for 32 children to be renamed before a single identity is verified." Rosamond's patience broke. "Take them inside." The warehouse doors opened. Several men stood around a long table beneath the official Belhaven emblem, a crown above 3 waves curling westward. Ledgers, contracts, and a locked cash box had been arranged before them. At the head of the table sat Magistrate Pemberton. Eleanor had expected a corrupt official or an empty chair. Instead, the magistrate looked genuinely startled when he saw the children. "Lady Rosamond told me only 5 witnesses would be brought for examination." Rosamond stopped. Mr. Vale recovered first. The remaining children require emergency placement after the fire. At midnight? Pemberton asked. 10. The ship must sail with the tide. The magistrate looked toward the nameless vessel. That ship is not licensed to carry passengers. It carries apprentices, Rosamond replied. Children are still passengers under harbour law. A door opened at the rear of the warehouse. Reverend Hale entered with Clara, Matthew, 6 patrons, and the captain of the parish constables. Adrian came last. The stolen strongbox was chained to his wrist. Rosamond's face emptied. Adrian placed the box on the magistrate's table. The rider carrying this fell when his horse struck a drainage ditch. We recovered the contents, unopened. He was one of Eleanor's servants, Rosamond said. No, Matthew replied. He was Silas Briggs, the supplier who delivered the replacement beds. Peter identified him before 3 witnesses. Briggs was led inside under guard, his shoulder bound from the fall. He refused to look at Rosamond. The magistrate struck the table. No ship leaves this quay until I understand what has occurred. Rosamond moved to his side. Then, begin with the Duchess. 5 children disappeared under her administration. They were found beneath her building, beside an accusation naming her. Her signatures appear in the ledger. Her private fund paid the steward, and she removed the children from my lawful custody after destroying the records. It was the strongest version of the lie. Eleanor waited until Rosamond finished. Open the strongbox, she said. Reverend Hale confirmed that its seals matched those placed at the Dower House. Inside were the scorched contracts, rescued from the archive, Adrian's written confession, the paper from the brass key, and the silver thorn fabric Daniel had recovered. Eleanor placed Rosamond's Belhaven contracts beside the originals. The children disappeared before His Grace transferred Saint Agnes to Lady Rosamond, she said. But the scheme required access created by decisions made afterward. She replaced the beds, admitting Briggs to the dormitories. Their slats became the tunnel barrier. She received the orphanage keys, including one concealing the payment list. She obtained authority over the records, the witnesses, and the carriages. Finally, His Grace's general authorization allowed her to create placements bearing his seal. Rosamond laughed. You have described ordinary administration. Then, let us examine what it administered. Eleanor held up the blank counting token. Every Saint Agnes child received a numbered token upon admission. The same number appeared in a private register stored separately from the public ledger. Briggs scraped the tokens blank so the children could be renamed without contradiction. The private register burned, Mr. Vale said. No, you burned a copy. Clara opened her medical case and removed a thin book. I kept the original beside the children's treatment records, she said. The Duchess required me to verify a token before administering medicine to any child too young to state a full name. One by one, the children gave their names. Clara read their numbers from the register. Reverend Hale compared them with earlier baptismal and admission records. Not one matched Rosamond's contracts. The magistrate's expression darkened. Eleanor turned to the forged withdrawal receipt. This payment supposedly came from my charity fund. It bears the signature of a trustee who had been dead for 3 weeks. Rosamond shrugged. Cresswell may have forged it without my knowledge. And the black signatures in the ledger? Cresswell. The children in the tunnel? Cresswell. The fire? Cresswell. The false contracts? Cresswell. Rosamond looked toward the missing steward as though piling every crime upon an absent man would bury him deep enough to protect her. Eleanor faced Adrian. Did you personally authorize any individual child named in these contracts? No, he said. I signed a general placement authority at Lady Rosamond's request without reviewing names or destinations. Did I advise you to do so? No. You warned me not to. Did you see that the signatures accusing me were written in the wrong ink? Yes. And what did you choose? Adrian's voice roughened. I chose my reputation over the truth. He did not accuse Rosamond for Eleanor. He merely authenticated his own failure. Eleanor laid Peter's copied contract beneath the official warehouse emblem. The emblem on these contracts is reversed. It was created by lifting an impression from an authentic seal and cutting a copy from that impression. Mr. Vale objected. That is speculation. Then summon Belhaven's licensed printer. A thin man was brought from an adjoining office. He carried the original wooden block used for warehouse documents. Rosamond's contracts did not match it. The magistrate examined both designs. Who printed these false forms. The printer looked toward Mr. Vale. I did not, he said. But 3 weeks ago, a woman paid to use my press after midnight. She claimed she was preparing a charitable announcement authorized by Blackmere. Can you identify her? Eleanor asked. The printer swallowed. Yes. Rosamond stood perfectly still. Eleanor placed the red ribbon, recovered from Rosamond's wrist, on the table, followed by the second counting token the constable had removed from her glove upon arrival. The woman knew there were 6 missing children before Daniel was found. She possessed a token scraped in the same manner as those in Briggs's sack. She controlled the key containing the payment list, and she brought the children here under contracts, bearing a reversed emblem. Rosamond lifted her chin. None of that proves I entered the printing room. Eleanor looked at the printer. Do not tell us her name yet. Tell us what she left behind. The man reached into his case and withdrew a metal plate wrapped in cloth. I kept it because she refused to pay the full amount. He uncovered a custom engraving plate used to reproduce a personal signature. The magistrate leaned forward. Whose signature does it bear? The printer turned the plate toward the lamplight. Everyone in the warehouse saw the engraved name, but Eleanor noticed something else first. One letter had been deliberately altered after the plate was made, and that alteration would reveal not only who forged Eleanor's signature, but who had originally commissioned the entire scheme. The ship waited at the private quay, with no flag and no name painted on its hull. The plate bore Eleanor Blackmere's name, but beneath the signature, almost hidden inside the final flourish, the engraver had cut a tiny workshop mark, the letter R. Someone had later attempted to change it into an E. Eleanor looked at the printer. What does that mark identify? The customer who commissioned the plate, he said. We use an initial when a patron demands secrecy. Rosamond's composure cracked. The woman who hired you gave a false name beginning with R, Eleanor said. When the plate was complete, she realized the mark could connect it to her and ordered you to alter it. The printer nodded. She called herself Mrs. Reed, but that was not her name. Look at every woman in this warehouse, Magistrate Pemberton ordered. Is she present? The printer pointed. Lady Rosamond Vane. Rosamond stepped backward. He is lying to escape prosecution for forgery. I expected you to say that, Eleanor replied. So I asked what you left behind before asking him to identify you. The altered mark proved the printer had known his customer as a woman using an R name. His testimony had not been suggested after he saw Rosamond. Mr. Vale closed his dispatch case. Matthew moved between him and the door. The magistrate addressed the printer. What exactly did Lady Rosamond order? 1 signature plate, 2 sets of charitable forms, and a reversed copy of the Belhaven warehouse emblem. She said the documents would persuade families to receive orphans after a fire. There had been no fire, Eleanor said. Saint Agnes was burned weeks after the order. The printer lowered his eyes. She also requested notices, announcing that the orphanage had become insolvent. The notice Eleanor recovered had been dated the day after the planned destruction. The fire, the false debt, and the dispersal of the children had all been prepared in advance. Rosamond laughed, but the sound was thin. A printing plate does not place children underground. No, Eleanor said. Your accomplices do. She turned toward Silas Briggs. You delivered the mattresses, removed the old beds, and used their slats to build the tunnel barrier. Cresswell admitted you through the western gate. The counting tokens were scraped inside your carriage. Briggs stared at the floor. Cresswell will hang for this, Rosamond said. A sensible man would not protect him. Briggs's head snapped up. You said no child would be harmed. Mr. Vale closed his eyes. There was the first fracture. Rosamond rushed toward Briggs, but the constables restrained her. You chained them in a flooding tunnel, Eleanor said. Cresswell did that, Briggs shouted. Lady Rosamond ordered us to hold 5 children until the Duchess was arrested. Then, Mr. Vale said, we needed a 6th who could copy her signature. Where is Cresswell? The magistrate demanded. On the ship. Constables boarded the vessel. They found the steward locked inside a storage cabin with a bag of gold and instructions bearing Mr. Vale's handwriting. Rosamond had intended him to sail with the children and take sole blame if the operation was discovered. Once brought into the warehouse, Cresswell understood how thoroughly he had been betrayed. His confession completed the chain. Rosamond had learned that several wealthy patrons planned to place Saint Agnes House under an independent royal trust, making Eleanor its permanent governor. Rosamond wanted both the building and the patronage network attached to it. Mr. Vale wanted the riverfront property, which would become immensely valuable when Parliament approved a proposed commercial quay. Eleanor stood in their way. They first removed children whose identities were difficult to trace, intending to sell their labour through distant ports. When Eleanor began questioning coachmen and parish clerks, they forged evidence of trafficking against her. Cresswell stole Adrian's signet ring at Rosamond's request. He used it to open the old tunnel door and later seal the placement contracts. Peter had taken it from the table while his captors argued about moving the children. The boy had not been sent back by chance. He had escaped with the one object connecting the crime to authority inside Blackmere's household. Rosamond's fatal mistake was believing Eleanor's childhood made her ashamed of Saint Agnes. She never imagined Eleanor would remember its hidden passages or risk returning to them. Magistrate Pemberton ordered Rosamond, Mr. Vale, Cresswell, and Briggs arrested. Briggs's cooperation would be considered when sentence was passed. Cresswell faced charges of abduction, unlawful confinement, forgery, and attempted flight. Mr. Vale was stripped of access to every Blackmere legal record and later removed from practice after the Crown inquiry exposed his role in preparing fraudulent contracts. Rosamond turned to Adrian as the constables bound her wrists. "Tell them I acted with your permission." Adrian did not look away. "I gave you authority I had no moral right to give. I signed what I refused to examine, and my choices enabled your crimes. But I did not authorize the abduction of children. You will lose everything if you admit that." "Not everything," he said. "Only what I once valued more than the truth." The ship remained at Belhaven. Every child returned to the Dower House before dawn. At 9 o'clock, the Royal Inspector arrived to find the Saint Agnes children assembled with their names, original numbers, medical records, and witnesses intact. Adrian testified first. He publicly withdrew every accusation against Eleanor. He surrendered his Crown charity appointments, accepted formal censure, and admitted that political ambition had made him choose Rosamond's convenient lies over his wife's evidence. He did not describe himself as another victim. The distinction mattered. The independent portion of Eleanor's settlement was restored under new trustees beyond Adrian's control. He funded the rebuilding of Saint Agnes, but relinquished all authority over its staff, accounts, and children. The riverfront land was placed permanently in the orphanage trust, preventing any future duke from selling it. He also provided separate maintenance and transferred the Dower House to trustees for Eleanor's lifetime use. Only after her name, property, work, and independence were secured did he ask to speak with her privately. They met in the burned schoolroom 3 months later. Snow showed through the unfinished roof. New desks waited beneath canvas sheets, and the great infirmary bell rested on the floor until its repaired tower could hold it again. "I loved the version of you who made my life orderly," Adrian said. "But when your judgment threatened my pride, I treated your loyalty as disobedience." Eleanor held the rebuilt orphanage keys. "You had many chances to choose differently." "I know. You saw the wrong ink. You heard the children. You watched Rosamond contradict herself. Then you signed." "I know." His voice broke, but he did not ask her to comfort him. "I will not request forgiveness," he continued. "I only ask whether I may continue repairing what I helped destroy. You may repair it because it is your duty, not because it earns you a wife." He bowed his head. "Then I will do it without expecting one." They would live separately. Eleanor did not promise to return to him. She agreed only that after 1 year of public accountability and honest correspondence, she would decide whether he had become a man she wished to know again. The choice belonged to her. Children gathered outside the new front doors as Eleanor climbed the steps of Saint Agnes House. Peter stood beside her, holding the restored silver patron's badge. Mary, now walking with a cane, carried the admission register. Adrian remained among the patrons below. At the beginning of her humiliation, Rosamond had taken the orphanage keys from Eleanor while Adrian watched. Now Adrian watched Eleanor place those keys into the new lock herself. She opened the doors. The children entered first.